More than 20 million Americans say they have seen an unidentified flying object. Yet the subject of UFOs is generally scorned by science, journalism, and the government. An Eyewitness News investigation into the topic that was broadcast last November has drawn worldwide attention, and not all of that attention has been positive. Tonight, George Knapp picks up where our previous series left off. The new series is called UFOs, the Best Evidence, ?
Gary and Mary Ruth, we've added the question mark for a good reason. There are many unanswered questions about UFOs and about some of the people who claim to have knowledge about the topic. Questions about credibility and motives. We'll be taking a hard look at some of those questions this week and beyond. One thing we found is that despite some sniping from other media and the scoffing of government officials, people want to know about UFOs, even some very prominent people.
Because I know 15 years ago, if you would have said something, especially with the guys I hang around, they would have gone right, you know, and when he going to Sparks.
Kent Oram is a hard-boiled, semi-cynical public relations man currently running the election campaign of Nevada Governor Bob Miller. A few years ago, Oram says, he and his wife saw something strange in the night sky over Mount Charleston.
And we looked at it for about 2.5 minutes and it never budged. And at the time I made a joke to my wife, you know, I mean, if you were under the Starship Enterprise, you know, that's sort of what it might look like. And it was, I would say, it was gigantic, and it was more of a square shape, but it was a lot of lights. And so I had a pair of binoculars in the back of my Ram Charger, so I went to get them. We finally found them, and then we looked up in the sky, and it was gone. I mean, just flat gone.
It depends on who I'm talking to about apprehension. You know, they kind of raise an eyebrow at you, you know.
Chuck Woodworth is a 20-year veteran of the Metro Police Department, a trained observer who grew up in the shadow of the Nevada test site. He and 4 friends saw their UFO in the desert north of Pioche.
All we saw was the light. I'm going to tell you, it's the most intense light I've ever seen. And I've been around some pretty heavy lights. If you stood under the police helicopter at night when they're lighting up an area and they come right down and really saturated with lights, those would be very, very dim to the lights we saw from this distance. I would judge this distance that we observed them to be at least 20 miles, 15 to 20 miles from us, and they were intense.
Neither Woodworth nor Oram can identify what they saw, but both believe recent publicity about UFOs has made it easier to openly discuss the subject. There are still those who have reservations, though. 2 of Southern Nevada's best-known elected officials say they've seen UFOs, but neither was willing to admit it on television. A veteran Las Vegas attorney sent us this letter saying he once had access to a top-secret military briefing book that included dozens of official photographs of alien beings and alien spacecraft. The attorney did not want his name used.
Most people believe that UFOs are physically real rather than imaginary. That's what the polls say. But the different poll also shows that those same people believe that other people don't believe that UFOs are physically real.
No one can say just how many UFOs are sighted each year, primarily because it's difficult to report a sighting. Metro Police won't take UFO reports at all and offer no advice on where to send them. The FAA and McCarran Tower also say they're not interested. And if you call Nellis Air Force Base, as Ruth Ruiz did, this is the response you'll get.
And he told me that they're not interested anymore in the UFOs because now we know whoever it is or whatever it is, it's not a threat to us, our national security. Now that's what he told me.
Nellis will give you the number of a private UFO hotline located in Seattle. What's more, both Nellis and McCarran spokesmen say they have no memory of even a single UFO sighting over their facilities, a claim that is flatly contradicted by informed sources at both locations. Some UFO sightings are reported to the planetarium, where astronomers can usually come up with a logical explanation.
Venus, when it first, a few months ago, when Venus first appeared in our evening sky, for this time around, we got a number of calls. What's that bright object in the sky? We'll be getting calls on Jupiter pretty soon because it's now rising about midnight in the east. So we get those calls. Mainly it's just curiosity. They see something strange they hadn't noticed before.
Even die-hard UFO believers admit that 90% of all UFO sightings are explainable, but it's the other 10% that are of interest.
One good unidentifiable flying object whose characteristics and appearance indicate we're dealing with a vehicle whose behavior says it wasn't made here is worth 50 cases that you can explain. Just as most drugs don't cure diseases. If you're sick with something, you want the one that does. Don't tell me about the ones that don't. So the focus with flying saucers has to be on the evidence, the best evidence from all over the world.
Using UFOs and evidence in the same sentence is a sore spot with some media outlets. The Las Vegas Review-Journal has taken a dim view of UFO reports. Columnists have cleverly compared the UFO topic to the search for Elvis. Media critics say it's nothing but a ratings ploy. When an international UFO convention was held in Las Vegas, the lone story done by the RJ was a profile of UFO debunker Phil KLAS, with a headline suggesting it was KLAS who knew the truth about flying saucers. Later, though, the paper succumbed to UFO fever with a front-page story in its Sunday supplement about UFO sightings in Nelson, Nevada.
Their word seems to be, snicker, snicker, and make fun of it. But, it's just this attitude that the journalists have got. If they didn't know about it before, it couldn't possibly be true. I mean, they've been sitting on this story now for about 2 years when I first started out, and there hasn't been one of them that has done any useful research at all.
Anyone who takes but 1 hour to review some of the available evidence cannot come away without the firm conviction that there is something out there.
Not all media have shunned UFOs. Radio talk show host Billy Goodman for months devoted most of his program to the topic, but Goodman's show was canceled by station management. His listeners suspect it's part of a government plot. Station executives say while the show was popular with listeners, it wasn't popular with advertisers. They canceled Goodman, they say, as part of a format change to news and sports programming. Much of Goodman's multi-state audience is now listening to Florida-based talk host Chuck Harder, whose For the People network is heard on 80 stations coast to coast and frequently focuses on UFO developments in southern Nevada. Predictably, UFOs remain a staple of the tabloids, which seem to be getting even further out than before. Nazi astronauts return to Earth in surprisingly good health, according to NASA sources. Space aliens stealing our frogs. They must be stopped before it's too late. Remember the psychic who invited aliens to land at a Monday night football game? They never showed up, not because the Eagles-Bears matchup wasn't appealing, but because the Goodyear blimp scared them away. One weekly tabloid featured a story about Bob Lazar, the young scientist who says he worked at S4, a secret Nevada military base where the government is allegedly tinkering with flying saucers of alien origin. The article included hyped-up non-quotes and artists' versions of S4. Lazar has also been featured in UFO magazines. This article demanded that he open up his life for scrutiny by skeptical UFO buffs. Other UFO magazines aren't much different from tabloids. This one awards $10 a month to the person who can rig up the best phony UFO photo. Lazar's story has even made it into Car and Driver magazine. A recent article highlighted a Nevadan named Bob who had built a stealth Corvette for the ostensible purpose of penetrating Groom Lake to capture video of the flying saucers. Lazar's story also caught the attention of at least one television network, Nippon Television of Japan, which sent a crew to Nevada to produce a special about Lazar and Area S4.
He seemed to be quite an interesting guy. He knew what he was saying. He's not another fruitcake, who just came out and wanted to tell all the story. So we did some backup check, and there seemed to be some truth.
Lee and his crew have produced 17 one-hour programs about UFOs for national broadcast in Japan. He says he can't understand why American networks avoid the topic. For the report on Lazar, Nippon set aside 2 full hours on a Saturday night.
I don't know about here, but in Japan, 2-hour special in a Saturday evening from 7 to 9, it's a hell of a, spot there.
There are more than a few people who consider the public fascination with UFOs to be downright dangerous. Aviation writer Phil KLAS says the belief in alien beings and a government cover-up is, quote, potentially as dangerous as Jonestown. That's the jungle settlement where dozens of people willingly committed suicide. A study by 2 psychologists concluded that persons obsessed with UFOs, especially cigar-shaped flying saucers or rounded discs, are victims of a familiar Freudian syndrome. If an interest in UFOs is a sign of mental aberration, then count the U.S. government as being among the disturbed. Bob Lazar, of course, can recite a litany of strange things he says have happened to him. Tapped phones, break-ins, threats. But even if you don't buy his story, there are others who can attest to a government interest in UFO adherence. Terry Tavernetti is the former police officer who performed polygraph tests on Lazar. Tavernetti, who has a corporate security job with a major Las Vegas business, says that shortly after his involvement with the Lazar probe was made public, his employers were contacted.
The corporate offices where I'm employed received a telephone call from a government agency wanting to know why I was getting involved in something that I shouldn't be. And I asked, well, what agency? What was said? Did they identify themselves? And I said, because I'll be more than happy to talk to them. And I was refused this information, told that he didn't know, meaning my boss.
Tavernetti, who still retains the tapes and printouts from Lazar's polygraphs, also says his home was burglarized in early January.
As an investigator of over 20 years, I don't believe in coincidences. There's a reason for everything. I mean, could it have been a random residential burglary? Yes.
A Las Vegas man named Roy Byram contacted us back in November 1989, saying he had information about Area 51 that he had gleaned by preparing tax returns for several people who worked at Groom Lake. Less than 24 hours after phoning us, Byram says, he was visited by two men claiming to be Secret Service agents who, quote, just wanted to lean on me a bit. Journalists who've studied the field for many years say that government interest in persons with inside information about UFOs is very real.
A body of information about UFOs in the possession of our government, which is so sensitive to the people in custody of it, that they will do just about anything to protect it.
Finally, there's this item. A Las Vegas resident currently working for local government told us she previously worked for a defense contractor and was privy to numerous high-level discussions about crashed discs, recovered bodies, and alien technology. She was going to provide us with some of this information, but less than 2 weeks ago says she was visited at her home by a man identifying himself as a government agent. The man said that any release of information would lead to trouble, adding that our source does a lot of traveling and that, quote, accidents can happen. The agent also mentioned that harm could come to the woman's family. She has now declined to talk with us. And you know, Gary and Mary Ruth, people watch reports like this at home, and I think some view it with interest, but they view it as in the same way they're interested in a movie of the week. This is not a movie of the week. Others seem to believe, particularly our media critics, like we're making this stuff up, and we're not making it up. We've spent almost a year on this investigation, and there's definitely a body of information out there that deserves an investigation.
George, you mentioned that the previous series has been seen in other states and countries. How has that happened?
Well, there's quite an underground network, these UFO people out there, UFO buffs that trade tapes and trade information of all sort. We know of 3 organizations or groups that have been selling bootleg copies of the tape in apparent or alleged violation of the copyright laws. Last night I was listening to a radio show. It was broadcast coast to coast. They were giving away dubs of the program as prizes to people who answered their trivia questions. And today we got a fax from Arizona. There's a group there that are charging $7.50 a head for a viewing of the tape. So it's gone everywhere.
What's coming up in coming days?
Quite a bit of stuff. We're going to dig deeper into the story told by Bob Lazar to see if there's any new evidence to support what he told us. We'll hear from what might be called the deep throat of the UFO world, an intelligence agent nicknamed the Falcon. We'll investigate claims that the government actively spreads disinformation, and we'll take a somewhat critical look at some of these UFO prophets of doom and UFO groups to find out if they may have ulterior motives in spreading the word about this stuff.
On this April 30th day in 1990, KLAS delivered another multi-part series entitled UFOs, The Best Evidence? This time with an inspired question mark. It would be Seinfeld's David Puddy, played by Patrick Warburton, who would deliver the ET-inspired answer, complete with a nod to the KLAS Channel 8 logo.
All signs point to yes. You got a question? You ask the 8 Ball. All signs point to yes.